They say, if it matters, you should say it out loud. But sometimes, the voice is not where honesty lives. Sometimes, the voice is where fear lives. A phone call can feel like a sudden spotlight. No drafts. No pauses. No quiet space to swallow a feeling before it spills. Just a ringing demand for presence. And texting feels like a dim room with a door you can open slowly. It lets a person breathe between sentences. It lets the nervous system decide whether it is safe to be seen. So why does "can I call you" tighten the chest like a small chain? Why does the typing bubble feel warmer than a human voice? And why do so many people carry this preference like a secret, ashamed of it, even when it is the only way they can stay connected? This reflection doesn't frame texting as cold. It reveals what it often protects. Music. Some people don't prefer texting. They relax in it. A call asks for immediate emotional availability. Not just your time, your tone, your timing, your responsiveness. It asks you to be a person in real time, with no shield between your inner weather and someone else's ears. Texting offers a gentler kind of closeness. A closeness with boundaries. It is connection, without collision. Because words on a screen do not watch you. They do not stare during silence. They do not react with a sigh you can't interpret, or a laugh you can't place. Texting gives a small power that many people never realized they needed. The power to pace intimacy. To answer when ready. To step away when flooded. To choose the exact shape of a sentence instead of letting feelings tumble out like stones down a hill. And there is a quiet truth behind this. Some nervous systems experience conversation as speed. Speed of interpretation. Speed of response. Speed of performance. A call does not only carry words. It carries micro-demands. Are you listening? Are you warm enough? Are you boring? Are you too much? Are you not enough? So texting becomes a soft compromise. A way to stay human with someone, without being consumed by the moment. This is why delayed replies can coexist with deep care. This is why short messages can carry long feelings. This is why someone can miss you intensely and still dread the sound of your voice. Because the preference is not always about avoiding people. Sometimes it is about avoiding the pressure of being perceived in real time. What if texting is not emotional distance, but emotional safety? What if the screen is not a wall, but a thermostat? A way to keep closeness at a temperature the body can survive. No one is born afraid of speaking. A voice becomes cautious the way a shoreline becomes smooth. Not through one wave, but through years of impact. For some people, talking was not a neutral act. Talking was a risk. Maybe speaking meant being interrupted, corrected mid-sentence, mocked for the wrong word, misunderstood, and then punished for the misunderstanding. Maybe feelings were treated like inconveniences, or explanations were treated like excuses. Maybe the loudest person won. In those environments, silence isn't emptiness. Silence is strategy. And later, even after the environment changes, the body stays trained. The body remembers, when words leave the mouth, they cannot be called back. Texting is different. Texting allows rehearsal. It allows the sentence to be held up to the light and checked. Is this safe? Is this too emotional? Is this too needy? Will this be used against me? It is not always manipulation. It is often protection. Even people who look confident can carry a hidden fear of live conversation. The fear of not sounding right. The fear of being judged in the pauses. The fear of being trapped. And sometimes it is not even fear of the other person. It is fear of what happens inside during calls. Because a voice can trigger old wounds. A tone of disappointment can sound like a parent. A sudden silence can sound like abandonment. A mild disagreement can feel like a door slamming. Texting lowers the volume of those echoes. It turns emotional life from a thunderstorm into a forecast. Manageable, predictable, containable. This is why some people can text for hours, but panic when the phone rings unexpectedly. It is not laziness. It is not immaturity. It is the nervous system avoiding an old cliff edge. And if someone grew up learning that being too much was dangerous, then a phone call feels like standing too close to the truth. Because voices reveal things. Breath reveals things. Hesitation reveals things. A text can hide trembling hands. A text can hide tears. A text can hide a heart racing for no visible reason. So the preference forms quietly. Not because the person doesn't care, but because the person cared once, out loud, and paid for it. Music. A conversation looks simple from the outside, but inside the brain, it is a fast-moving river. You are decoding tone, tracking meaning, predicting the other person's reaction, searching memory for the right story, choosing an appropriate facial expression, even if no one can see your face. A phone call compresses all of that into seconds. Texting expands time, and time changes everything. Texting is asynchronous. It gives space between stimulus and response. That space can feel like oxygen, especially for minds that run hot. This isn't only personality. It is cognitive load. When the mind processes slowly, deeply, or intensely, a live call can become exhausting. Not because the person on the other end is wrong, but because the brain is running too many tabs at once. This is why texting is often favored by people who are careful with language. People who don't want to say the wrong thing. People who would rather be accurate than quick. It is also why texting can feel safer for people who fear being evaluated in the moment. A study on social anxiety and loneliness found that anxious participants tended to prefer texting and rated it as a better medium for expressive and intimate contact, while lonely participants tended to prefer voice calls and saw texting as less intimate, showing how the same behavior can have different emotional roots. There is another layer, too: uncertainty. A phone call has no visible rules. You cannot see when the other person is busy. You cannot predict how long the call will last. You cannot easily exit without feeling rude. That uncertainty can spike anxiety, especially when the mind already expects the worst. Research on telephone anxiety suggests it can relate to the use of digital communication technologies and may lead people to prefer other forms of communication over phone conversations. So the brain chooses what feels manageable. A text can be reread. A text can be edited. A text can be answered in fragments when emotional energy returns. A phone call is like a river you must step into fully, now. So if your mind has ever frozen mid-call, if your chest has ever tightened while searching for a response, if you have ever replayed your own words after hanging up, as if they were evidence, that is not a moral failure. That is the brain trying to buy time, trying to protect coherence, trying not to drown in speed. Music. People often assume that real communication must be richer. More cues, more voice, more presence. And in many ways, that is true. Communication frameworks like media richness theory describe how different channels carry different amounts of social information, tone, immediacy, feedback, nuance, and how richer channels can be more effective for ambiguous or complex messages. Source. But here is the quiet paradox. Sometimes, the very richness of a medium becomes overwhelming. Because richer communication is also riskier. A call contains more cues, which means more chances to misread. Was that sigh annoyance or tiredness? Was that pause rejection or distraction? Was that boredom or listening? For a sensitive mind, more cues doesn't always mean more clarity. It can mean more noise. Texting, by contrast, is lean. It removes many cues. And for some people, that removal feels like relief. Like taking off headphones that have been playing too loudly. But there is a cost. A text can't carry warmth the same way a voice can. It can't repair misunderstanding in the same breath it creates it. It can't easily communicate, "I'm here," the way tone can. So why choose it? Because a person who prefers texting is often trying to control two opposing needs at once. The need to connect, and the need not to be overwhelmed by connection. It is intimacy, without the full sensory storm of intimacy. And sometimes, this preference is also about self-presentation. A way to be the best version of the self. On calls, the self is raw, unedited, breathing, hesitating, human. In texts, the self is curated. Not in a fake way, but in a careful way. It's the difference between singing live and recording in a studio. Some people can sing beautifully, but only when they have the chance to do another take. So the question isn't, why do you avoid calls? The deeper question is, what parts of you feel safer when you have time to shape your words? And what parts of you fear being heard exactly as you are? In one imperfect, irreversible moment. Music. There is a social myth that lingers like static. If someone prefers texting, they must be detached. If someone avoids calls, they must be shallow. If someone answers with short messages, they must not care. But reality is quieter than that. Many people who prefer texting are not emotionally absent. They are emotionally regulated. They have learned that emotion can spill. That words can explode like a volcano when pressure builds too fast. That conversations can escalate when the heart is beating too loudly to think. So they choose the medium that helps them stay kind, clear, stable. Texting can be a form of emotional responsibility, especially for people who have seen what happens when they speak under stress. Because on a call, emotion comes with momentum. If tears rise, the other person hears it. If anger rises, it spills into the voice before it becomes language. Texting slows momentum. It gives friction to feeling, like sand slowing down a rushing river. And it also gives exit routes. A person can respond later without the performance of a goodbye. A person can step away to regulate without being interrogated. This is why texting can feel merciful. But it is also why texting can be misunderstood. Because the other person may experience the delay as rejection, or experience the brevity as indifference. And here, the two nervous systems collide. One person seeks connection through immediacy. The other seeks connection through space. Neither is wrong, but both can feel wounded. This is also where shame begins. The texter starts to feel defective. Why can't you just talk like everyone else? Why does your body panic at something so normal? And the truth is, for some generations, calling is no longer normal. Reports on younger adults' communication habits describe how unexpected calls can be associated with dread or bad news, and how many prefer texting instead. So it isn't just psychology, it's culture, habit, a world that trained people to communicate in fragments. Still, beneath all of it, there is something tender. The person who texts often wants to be understood accurately, not quickly. The person who avoids calls often wants closeness, but without the feeling of being trapped inside someone else's urgency. That isn't coldness. That is a different language for care. Music. Texting protects, but protection always has a price. A text can be rewritten until it is perfect, and that perfection can become a cage. Because life is not edited. Love is not edited. Repair is not edited. A voice carries spontaneity, and spontaneity carries vulnerability. When everything becomes typed, something human can thin out. Not because texting is shallow, but because the body is absent. And bodies communicate safety. A voice can soften a sentence that looks harsh on a screen. A laugh can dissolve tension before it crystallizes into resentment. A pause can be shared instead of interpreted as neglect. Text can't hold silence the same way. Silence in text is ambiguous. It becomes a blank while the mind stares into. And for some people, that ambiguity becomes anxiety. What did that mean? Did they misunderstand? Did they leave? This is where texting can become a loop. The very medium that creates safety can also create overthinking. And it helps to say this carefully. Sometimes changing the medium doesn't remove the fear, it only changes its shape. Research that tracked social anxiety and emotions across digital and face-to-face communication found that emotional difficulties can show up across mediums, challenging the comforting belief that digital communication always provides emotional safety. Fear becomes waiting. Fear becomes rereading. Fear becomes checking whether the punctuation sounded angry. Fear becomes staring at the scene label like it is a verdict. And yet, people still prefer it. Because even with its costs, it may feel less terrifying than voice. So the question becomes softer now. What has your nervous system been trying to manage all along? Not how do you stop texting? Not how do you force calls, but what does your body believe will happen if you are heard live? What does it fear will be exposed? In the tremble, the breath, the unplanned honesty? Some people don't avoid calls because they don't want connection. They avoid calls because they want connection so badly that they cannot bear risking it in real time. There is a kind of grief that doesn't look like grief. It looks like a person staring at a ringing phone, wanting to answer, and not moving. It looks like someone typing, "Sorry, can't talk right now." When the truth is, talking is not right now for the nervous system. And yet the longing remains. Because even people who prefer texting often miss something. The warmth of being met instantly. The softness of a tone that says, "You're safe." The reality of laughter that doesn't need translation. So a person lives between two worlds. The world of voice, rich, alive, immediate. And the world of text, controlled, buffered, survivable. This is not a character flaw. It's a nervous system negotiation. Sometimes, preferring texting is simply a communication style. Sometimes it reflects anxiety, uncertainty, or learned protection. Sometimes it's cultural habit. Sometimes it's all of them braided together like a rope. And it deserves gentleness. Because the preference is often rooted in care. Care for the self. To not be overwhelmed. Care for the other. To not speak sharply when flooded. To not stumble into misunderstanding. To not react too fast. Even this preference can be love. A love that chooses precision over immediacy. But precision can also hide tenderness. And tenderness needs air. So, the most honest thing to recognize is this. Texting is not the opposite of intimacy. It is intimacy with a different shape. And for some people, that shape was the only way connection stayed possible at all. So if the voice has been absent, it might not be gone. It might be waiting, like a small flame protected from wind. Waiting for the moment when connection feels less like exposure, and more like warmth. Waiting for a relationship where presence doesn't feel like pressure. Where silence isn't punishment. Where a call isn't a trap. Until then, the screen remains a bridge. Not perfect, but real. If this video made you feel seen, if parts of this reflection felt familiar, if something quiet inside you was touched, especially the part that flinches when the phone rings, then let that recognition be soft. Not everything that protects you is a problem. Sometimes protection is simply old wisdom that learned to survive in the only ways available. Preferring texting doesn't automatically mean you are detached. It doesn't mean you are broken. And it doesn't mean you are incapable of closeness. It may mean you have a nervous system that values space. A mind that values accuracy. A heart that learned to be careful with sound. And if that's true, you are not alone in it. If you'd like to stay connected, subscribing can be a gentle way to keep this channel close. A quiet space where the hidden corners of the human heart are explored without judgment, and where emotions are handled carefully. And if you ever feel ready, sharing in the comments is welcome, but only if it feels safe. A sentence is enough. Even a fragment. Sometimes one honest line from you becomes permission for someone else to feel less alone in their own silence. You deserve gentleness.